Welcome to the Stories with Traction podcast. I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Thank you for joining us as we uncover how stories are one of the most important aspects of your business. We'll talk about struggles, victories, and how you can utilize strategic storytelling to inspire those around you to action. Enjoy this episode. Anxiety, exhaustion, stress, three words that have significant meaning. I've had the opportunity to speak all over the United States about strategic storytelling. And what fascinates me is the negative stories that people consistently tell themselves that lead to worry and fear. And worry and fear has the ability to affect anyone, regardless of title or leadership position. But what if there was a way that we can combat this? What if there was a technique that we could use to radically reduce our anxiety? That will be the focus of this episode. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Katie Nall, who is an author, speaker, and EFT practitioner. So welcome to the Stories with Traction podcast, Katie.
Thank you so much, Matt. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here on your amazing podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited. And listen, I decided to briefly introduce you. I was going to list off all of your accomplishments, but I realized that it would take the entire podcast episode. So I just thought, hey, we'll start off, light introduction. We can dig more into your background as we go on. But you've done a lot of stuff over the years, a lot of stuff with training people, helping people, various leadership positions, really understand different elements of how to process anxiety, worry, fear, all of these things that I feel are so prevalent right now in our society, almost on a maximum scale. I feel like the last few years, people are more burned out, flustered, frustrated than they've ever been. So I feel like what you do has never been more important. And I appreciate what you do. And I'm so excited to dive in to different elements of EFT and other things that you've done to really help people.
Yeah, well, you can do all this stuff, Matt, when you're about 200 years old. So.
Nice. Awesome. This is going to be a fun conversation. Let me tell you, this is awesome. All right. So, and I've never heard anxiety and fun in the same sentence. So let's have fun with it and unpack anxiety. So this is awesome. So for everyone listening, I'm going to refer to Dr. Katie's TEDx talk called A Technique to Eliminate Math Anxiety. So I will include the link to this TEDx in the show notes. In fact, I would encourage people, if you have the opportunity, pause this episode right now and go click on the link to the TEDx talk, watch the TEDx, and then come back to this episode. I think it would be very helpful to conceptualize a lot of what we're going to be going over. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. You can wait until this episode's over, but I would encourage you to still go to the TEDx, watch it, just so this conversation makes a lot more sense to you. Okay, so I just want to use that as a frame of reference because, Katie, I'll mention I going through your TEDx talk, and I went through it a few times. You talk about something that I was not familiar with. I think I might have loosely heard about it years ago. I never really paid much attention to it, but where you were going through it, I really understood more, and I want to dive into it on a much deeper level. So it was more revelation knowledge to me when I heard it. So I want to dive into that. And I want to start off by talking a little bit about how you got into that space. You start the TEDx out by talking about you sharing your experience teaching math classes in college. So can you tell us about just some of the anxiety you've experienced with students and what really led you to that world of EFT?
Matt, at the time, I was a full-time employee as the campus director of a state college. And as a side, I was also an adjunct instructor for math classes for non-math, non-scientific majors, which meant this was the required course to be able to graduate. Yeah, you're laughing, you know.
Which means they hate this class, right?
They hate this class. And they had to have it to graduate. So, that didn't help. That did not help. I would have student after student come into my office, Matt, and say, I have one class left to graduate. I'm like, great, let's get you signed up. This is going to be fabulous. We're going to finish this class and go out with a bang. I said, what is it? And they would quiver, they would tremble, their hands would pour out sweat, they would change, their color would change from their neck going up, turning beet red. I'm like, what is it? And they would say, it's math. And I am a mathematician. I'm like, fabulous. You saved the best for last. What a great idea.
Oh, man.
Fall apart into a puddle of tears. I'm like, what's going on? What happened? I just said the word math and they would completely fall apart. And I realized that they had such deep anxiety, such deep fear, such deep frustration. And so at first I would say, well, what happened? When you think about math, what happened? And they would tell stories. I know you're a master storyteller. And so their stories would come out. Well, when I was in third grade, the teacher did this. My brother always said this. My parents always said this. And so there were all these stories that they had wrapped out. So at first I would start working with them and saying, well, what if that person didn't know everything? Or we would just start kind of unwinding the stories. And sometimes that would work, Matt, but frequently there was more. So I was a middle-aged student going back after being out of college for 30 years to get my PhD in mathematics education because it was one of my life goals. And as a life goal, it was just for my personal satisfaction. More than one person questioned my sanity.
More than one person. I mentioned this to you prior to us hopping on. Getting a PhD in mathematics is mind-boggling to me. Like, I can't even conceptualize. That's like doing multiple marathons in my mind. I can't even fathom it. So that is such an amazing achievement. Good for you. I mean, that's amazing to me. So, all right, so continue on. So you get this degree, you achieve this life goal, and then after that, you were able to help a lot of other people that are struggling with math, correct?
Yeah. So what happened is part of your dissertation is you have to do a lot of research. And so one of my research was how do you relieve fear and anxiety in math? And there was nothing out there, math, nothing. And so I recognized it as a word problem, took it back, and I said, what's the most important pieces? And how do you resolve fear and anxiety? And that was in 2010. And I saw the second edition of Nick Ortner's Tapping Solution. I watched all 10 days, bought the book, bought the DVD. They mentioned how to relieve fear and anxiety about finances, about relationships, about weight loss, about addictions. Nobody mentioned math or tests. I had no idea, Matt, if it's going to work or not. But the students were desperate. And, desperate clients are your best, right? Because they'll do anything.
That's a valid point. Valid point. I'm writing that down. Desperate clients are your best.
They will follow you anywhere. So I'm like, look, I have no idea if this is going to work or not, but let's just try it. So we would start the tapping. And if you're game, we'll do this later on your show. And we'd start the tapping, and one after another started coming back. And they'd say, Dr. Nall, I think I'm passing the math class. Well, Matt, I had no idea who was more surprised, them or me, because I had no idea if it was going to work or not. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I better get trained because I don't know what I'm doing. And I went to get training, and it turned out I had no idea what I was doing. And I went and got level 1, level 2, level 3, quantum, which is interesting, into past lives, trauma. I got supervision, mentoring, and although it only took me 4 years while working full-time to earn my PhD in math education, it took me 8 years working full-time to become a master trainer in freedom technique. And now my goal, when I first found out about it and saw how powerful it was, I was like, I want everybody to have this tool in their back pocket because it's something that is non-addictive, non-invasive, and you can do it yourself. For all I call them waffles, Matt, dissolving your waffles, dissolving your worries, your anxieties, your fear, frustration, lethargy, exhaustion, and stress, and dissolving them all yourself.
Wow. Okay, so I just for clarity, because I really want one, I want to make sure that I heard you correctly, but also for people listening, just so they can understand all that you went through to position yourself to help people. Correct me if I'm wrong. You said it took you 4 years to get your PhD, but 8 years of studying to master EFT. Is that correct?
To become a master trainer.
Wow, that is very labor intensive. Okay, so there's a few things to unpack with what you said. So the first is based on what you said of you doing this when you didn't really know what you were doing, it was still helping. So that screams to me that even if you start somewhere, you're gonna see results. And I think that's really important for people to recognize. Would you agree with that?
Yes, that's absolutely true. Now, unfortunately, what happened because I wasn't trained is that more than one, there's 3 people I know of specifically, I accidentally, by asking questions and doing everything I thought I knew from the book and the DVD, was they relived and went into a trauma response. Now we were able to calm them down, but for some people, it could be really, really traumatic. That's why the training is so important. It's easy to learn and takes a while to know. I guess that's a great way to put it.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. All right. So this is so powerful that done correctly, people can experience radical change and growth, but done incorrectly could potentially be devastating.
Exactly.
Okay, so that to me, that just speaks to the power of this. So let's do this a little bit, because I want people to not only think about this from a theory perspective, but also in practicality as well. So for everyone listening to this, maybe they might have heard of EFT in the past, maybe in passing, maybe reading through an article. I know that me personally, I heard of it, but not in the way that you described it on your TEDx talk. So let's go through this together. So from a practical perspective, what should people do to start the process of getting into EFT to start to see changes in their life?
So I would encourage your listening audience to watch the video. That's a good way. There's lots of videos out now on emotional freedom technique, also called EFT or tapping. Now, if you Google tapping, you're going to get into tap dancing, all kinds of taps.
Sure.
But if you Google emotional freedom technique or EFT, there's another TEDx that was done by Dr. Peta Stapleton out of Australia, and she gives a clinical perspective of tapping as well. And then after that, I would encourage them to experience it. Go to a certified practitioner and have a session. Most certified practitioners that I know usually want to book 3 one-hour sessions on an individual issue. And understand that although it can be quick, if you have a trauma or a traumatic experience, it may take longer, but the clinical studies have shown, Matt, that when you compare cognitive behavior therapy or talk therapy to emotional freedom technique, EFT or tapping, to something called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprogramming, that among the 3 of them, EFT and EMDR have proven to be more effective than talk therapy. The other astounding finding is that when you work with an issue on EFT or EMDR, the issue does not return. Now, I will share candidly that I went to therapy once a week for 4 years and had great results. I was really happy. And at the end, when both the therapist and I agreed that we were finished, as I was walking out of the door, he said, "Oh, by the way, you may find that you're in a similar circumstance that you were in your traumatic experience, and you may have the same response all over again." Well, I got stopped cold. I said, "Wait a minute."
Wow.
I thought we were all done with this. And he kind of shook his head and said, "No, you may experience those same emotions over again. Just know that you can control them." Well, the nice thing about EFT and EMDR is that you do not have those same emotional reactions when you're placed in the same scenario again.
Interesting. So what is, for people that, not to go into all the weeds of the psychology, but I guess more in like layman's terms, Can it be compared in some way, shape, or form to like an acupuncture where you're utilizing pressure points to relieve stress?
It's very much like acupuncture. The
Okay.
difference is it's more like acupressure, where you're
Okay.
using your own fingertips to tap on different points of your body. And those points were defined by electrical engineer Gary Craig, who had studied at Stanford at University. He had noticed that in traditional Chinese medicine, they have something called meridians running through our body, that traditional Chinese medicine sees it as energy that's flowing through our body. And that the belief is that when energy cannot flow, that's when dis-ease erupts. That's when illnesses erupt. That's when we have challenges. And so tapping on these particular points are meant to relieve those blockages and allow the energy to flow through our body without obstruction.
Interesting. So in the TEDx, you mention math students, and I thought it's an amazing story. Again, I highly recommend people go check it out. I think very engaging. I can picture the students, their stress, their frustration. I've been there too. Math was my kryptonite for many, many years. So I was right there in it with them, feeling sorry for them. And then there was this major victory where through the different things that you did with tapping, there was radical change, unbelievable change in a sense. But I want people listening to recognize this doesn't just have to do with students. You have also mentioned CEOs of thousands of people that they're leading people. They can utilize this. You had mentioned athletes. You had mentioned a lot of different individuals that are in potentially high stress situations can utilize this, correct?
Yeah, and it turns out it doesn't matter who we are or where we are or what we're doing. The only way, as the founder, the one who identified the term stress, Dr. Hans Selye, almost not quite 100 years ago, the way that you eliminate stress is by death.
Oh gosh.
So every day we have some form of stress. And so how do we handle the stress? And the thing is, Matt, what happens is that when we feel stress, and it doesn't matter if it's what Dr. Selye calls eustress, which is what we call light or happy stress, joy, love, happiness, or if we have what we call the heavier, darker stress like anger, rage, fury, jealousy, any of those stressors, when we have them in our body, immediately within a flash of a second, our body reacts. The difference is when we have our lighter stress, our body reacts in a much faster, lighter way. And when we have our heavier stress, our hormones that are released, our adrenal, our cortisols, our thyroids that are released in our body are much more intense and much stronger. And that's because it's a survival instinct, Matt. But the difference is we don't have saber-toothed tigers in that math test, but our body is reacting as if we did. And when that happens, all the oxygen, all our muscles, all our blood is going to our large muscle groups. And that's why when we look at a test, or we're facing a difficult situation as a CEO, as a leader, and we're facing an awful situation, all of our resources are going to our large muscle groups, and there's not enough oxygen in our brain. We can't think clearly. We get muddled. We make bad decisions. All of those things are happening because our sympathetic nervous system has hijacked our body. And so we have to bring in the parasympathetic nervous system. And the quickest, easiest way I know is through tapping.
Interesting. Okay, so let's unpack two different things that I heard going on just within our conversation. So one of the things that you mentioned earlier on was a lot of people can tell themselves very negative stories. So maybe they experienced something in the past and they're continually telling themselves this negative story in a loop, and it's creating a tremendous amount of anxiety. And then you also said that we have stress, right? Until the day we die, we're going to have stress. But I want to focus on that heavy stress. Yeah. So when someone's going through something that is causing them a lot of anxiety, it is causing them a lot of stress because of the negative stories they've been telling themselves, and they are they're interested in adopting the tapping techniques, what are the pressure points on one's body they need to focus on when it comes to tapping?
Well, I'm going to invite you to tap along with me.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Now, if you're driving and listening to this podcast, just listen. But if you're not driving, I encourage you to do along with me. We're going to do the tapping points just by themselves, and then we'll add words. How's that sound, Matt?
Perfect.
Okay. So on the side of the hand between your wrist and your little finger, and you can use your right hand or your left hand, it doesn't matter. But on that side between your wrist and your little finger, use the fingers, 4 fingers of your other hand and tap right there. So right now I'm using the 4 fingers of my right hand to tap on the side of your hand between your wrist and your little finger, just that side part. That's
okay.
on the side, and you're tapping right on the side. So like my pointer finger of my right hand is right at the end of my little finger of my left hand, just on that narrow part of that side. Okay.
Okay.
Got it?
Got it.
Okay. And then when we're there, we're going to have 3 sentences that we're going to say while we tap right there. And then you go to the top of your head, the crown of your head, and tap on the crown of your head. And you can use your right hand or your left hand or both. It doesn't matter. And you're tapping on the crown of your head. That's your liver channel.
And that's with all 4 fingers?
Yeah, you can do 2 fingers, 3 fingers, 4 fingers. That doesn't matter. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then the next spot is above your nose on the edge of your eyebrow. I usually use 2 fingers right on the edge of your eyebrow above your nose. And you can use your right or your left or both and tap on right there on the edge of your eyebrow. And then the next spot is between the edge of your eye and your hairline. Go to the edge of the eye and your hairline, between the edge of your eye and your hairline, and right there on your temple, tap right there. That's your gallbladder channel. And then the next spot, Matt, is where I keep all my bags for a quick getaway, and that's under my eye. So tap under your eye. And again, you can tap on your right side, your left side, or both. It doesn't matter. The next spot is under your nose, above your lip. You tap right there and tap there a few times. And then we're going to tap under your lip, above your chin. And then we're going to have 2 hands, your palms facing you, and cross them at your wrist. That actually gives you an extra meridian point. And then tap right, just bring your hands right in and tap right on your collarbone right there. Use both hands and tap both right there, right underneath there. And then the last spot, Matt, is about 4 inches under your arm. And you tap and give your ribs a good tapping. And again, you can use your right side or your left side, or you can give yourself a hug and tap there, or you can come in from the side if you want and tap there. So those are the 8 points for what we call the basic EFT. There's many other versions, but that one's the basic one. And that's what I demonstrated in the first TEDx talk that I did.
Okay, so basic EFT. So while people are tapping, you had mentioned 3 sentences. So what are some of the things that people would be saying as they're tapping?
So I would ask a number of questions. So the first question I would ask is, we need to make sure that everything we say is true for the client. So if I ask you to repeat a phrase or a word that you go, I wouldn't say belly, I would say gut, right? If I say something about your belly and you say, I'd say gut, I'm going to ask you to repeat it in your own words, because it's really important that everything that comes from the client has got to be the truth. The second thing is I would ask to think about what emotion, what triggered that emotion. So Matt, I'll ask you, in the last 24 to 48 hours, what has caused you any waffles, any worries, anxiety, fear, frustration, lethargy, exhaustion, or stress?
I took 2 red eyes home this week, very exhausted, did not sleep on the plane. So my circadian rhythm is completely out of whack right now.
Okay, great. The next question I'd ask is, when you think about your circadian rhythm being out of whack, what emotion comes up?
Tired.
Tired is a good emotion. Next thing I would ask is, from 0 to 10, where 0 is like, it's no big deal, I'll be taking care of it. And 10 is the most tired you've been in your entire life. Where are you?
7.
A 7. Next thing I would ask is this true statement. Right here, right now, I feel safe.
Yes.
Okay. Now, again, remember, everything has got to be true. So if you're listening in the audience and that statement of right here, right now, I feel safe is not true, I have a long list of other things that they can substitute for it. They can just reach out to me. So let's start again on the side of the hand. So I'm tapping on the side of the hand and repeat after me. Even though I've been on 2 red eyes.
I've been on 2 red eyes.
And I am tired.
And I am tired.
Oh, I forgot to ask you, where do you feel the feeling of tired in your body from the top of your head to the bottom of your toes?
Probably my head.
Okay.
Just zoning in on my head, not really anything else.
I'm tired in my head.
I'm tired in my head.
Right here, right now, I feel safe.
Right here, right now, I feel safe.
And then we do that 2 more times, even though I'm tired in my head.
I'm tired in my head.
After those 2 red eyes.
After those 2 red eyes.
Right here, right now, I feel safe.
Right here, right now, I feel safe.
Last time, even though
there
were 2 red eyes this week.
There were 2 red eyes this week.
And I am tired.
And I am tired.
In my head.
In my head.
Right here, right now, I feel safe.
Right here, right now, I feel safe.
Then tap on the top of your head and say, tired in my head.
Tired in my head.
And then above your nose on the edge of your eyebrow, tap and say, tired in my head.
Tired in my head.
And then on the side of the eye, between your eye and your hairline, tired in my head.
Tired in my head.
And then under your eye, tap and say, tired in my head.
Tired in my head.
Under your nose, above your lips, tired in my head.
Tired in my head.
Under your lips, above your chin, tired in my head.
Tired in my head.
And then cross your hands and tap on your shoulders, or collarbone. Tired in my head.
Tired in my head.
And then under your arms, tired in my head.
Tired in my head.
Now blow all your air out. And if you have any water nearby, take a drink of water. I know, it's funny.
Okay.
Now, I want you to think about those 2 red eyes, Matt, and how tired you are in your head. And from 0 to 10, how tired does it feel now?
I would say 4. I think it went from a 7 to a 4.
And you can do this 1 or 2 more times, and it will actually go to a 0, and you will not be tired anymore.
Wow. So literally within a minute, there was significant progress. And then doing it again, there's going to be even more significant progress.
This is a great thing to do for all of your audience members who do have jet lag from time to time. You can do it before your flight, during your flight, and after your flight, and you really won't experience jet lag. I flew from Florida to Spain a couple of years ago to do the walk on the Camino, Camino de Santiago, and had no jet lag.
So this is what I want everyone listening. Like, I wish that everyone can experience this and feel what I'm feeling right now. So as I was going through those different pressure points, right now I feel different. Like, I feel like there's been a release. And I don't know all the psychology of this. I'm learning this myself, but I feel a significant release. So I'm very excited to continue to explore this. And I'm so thankful that you brought this to our attention. I want people that are listening to this that may think, hey, this is interesting, or maybe some people think, oh, this sounds silly. I want you to talk about the Scott story in your TEDx, because I think that was a powerful moment. So you had a student who was not doing well in math. He unfortunately was in a position where if he didn't pass your class, this math class, he would not have received his degree. And what happened after utilizing the tapping?
Well, I want to tell the Scott story, and then I want to tell the Bob story that's not in the TEDx. So the Scott story is, Scott was a big guy. He was a really big guy. And so when he came into my doorway, he was as tall as the doorway and just as wide. And he came in and he was shaking his finger at me and he was yelling, Dr. Nall. And I kind of trembled back, Matt, because he was a big guy. I'm 5'2". I'm not a big person. And I was sitting behind a desk and I have a can of Raid nearby. So I'm like, yes, how can I help you, Scott?
That's awesome.
And he came around, swooped me up, and he said, if it hadn't been for you and your voodoo stuff, I never would have gotten my degree. He was sold on it. It actually helped him graduate. Now I'm going to tell you my Bob story as well.
Okay.
When I was learning tapping, I used my first volunteer victim as my husband, Bob. And so one night after supper, I said, come here, honey, sit down on the couch next to me. And he was kind of wary, but he sat next to me and he said, what is it this time? Because I'm always doing something different. And I said, oh, I just want you to tell me all the negative that you have, because we want to try this out. And he kind of looked at me sideways, Matt. He's like, okay, for 40 years, you've been telling me to be positive, and now you want me to tell the negative? I said, yeah, the positive wasn't working. We're going to try something new.
Interesting.
He said, I'm not falling into this. It smells like a trap. I said, you know what? Don't worry. I live with you. I know all your negative. I said, just follow me and repeat after me. So he followed me, repeated after me. I knew he was having problems with clients. I knew he was having computer technical problems. And I knew there was a vendor that was making him crazy about a bill. So I brought these different things up and we did different kinds of tapping. And he got up, put his hands on his hips and said, well, that was a waste of time. And I said, okay. Next day he came home from work and I said, how was work? And he said something I seldom hear. He said, it was great. I looked at him and I said, really? I said, what about that client that's really been just a real pain in the neck? He said, oh, I took care of it. They know I'm a professional and everything went wow, great. I said, I said, what about that vendor that you were so upset with? He said, I called them, we talked everything out, and they're giving me a credit. It's all fine. I know your computer's not working, Bob. So what's going on with that? He said, oh, I called technical support and they got everything all worked out. Well, I had to take 2 steps back and look at him and have to say, so that tapping thing never worked, right?
That's awesome. That's amazing. All right, so here's what I view that as, and here's what I really want everyone listening to grab a hold of. Sometimes as leaders, it's okay to look foolish in the moment to look like a genius in the future. And what I mean by that is, you mentioned during that Scott story that he said, if it wasn't for your voodoo, I never would have gotten my bachelor's degree and passed, right? So in the moment where you were going through tapping, that individual in that present moment may have viewed it as silly, but they're going along with it. And then sure enough, it ended up being a victory. The same thing with the story that you shared regarding your husband. So in the present moment, it seemed like it was foolish at the time. It was silly at the time. But then later on, come to find out that it actually worked. And I want leaders to really grab a hold of that, because often we know different things that other people might not know. And if we can guide them and direct them and help them through the different stories that we're sharing to get them over that hump, in the future, it's going to pay off in big dividends for the people that we're serving. And I want to share an example of this, because I think this is really important, because for me personally, I struggled with this for quite some time. And then I let it go, and it ended up being a victory for me. So for instance, I did improv comedy for 4 years. Okay. Now, a lot of people that hear that, they immediately think of, stand-up comedy and, funny and all these different things. Improv comedy to me was more focused on stage dynamics. So it was more focused on communication, really understanding the ins and outs of what makes an audience an audience. And it was invaluable to me as a professional speaker. There are exercises that we do in improv comedy that, in my opinion, because I've seen it time and time again, are life-changing. Like literally, from a communication perspective, it is unbelievable. And a lot of times it's not utilized in corporate America. And there are different exercises that I kept asking myself, should I be doing this with CEOs? Should I be doing this with executives? When I go in and I speak to sales teams, should I be taking them through different improv exercises, thinking in my mind, they're going to view this as silly. But sure enough, it doesn't matter who the person is. It doesn't matter if this individual is a CEO that runs a company of thousands of people. The overwhelming consensus and feedback is the improv exercises that I take them through were not only invaluable, but they start implementing the different philosophical approaches in their life. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the same is true with what you do. There are people listening to this podcast, and as they're listening to you telling me what pressure points to touch, they may be rolling their eyes, thinking to themselves, what is this? Like I'm listening to the wrong podcast episode. What I experienced while you did that, there was such a relief for me, because I came into this being completely exhausted. And to go from a 7 to a 3 or 4 in a matter of a minute, I think that's significant progress. I'm very excited to continue to explore and go through these. I'm actually going to go back and listen to your TED Talk again. I went through it a few times, but I'm going to go back and do it again and start researching a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, because I do think there's tremendous value in it. I want people to grab a hold of that. So thank you so much for taking us through that. I'm sure you've been through that many, many times, many years, where some people view it as silly right out of the gate, but then they come back to you and they say, you changed my life. You helped me with this. You helped me with that. So I appreciate you continuing to do this work.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I recently had a federal law enforcement agent who reluctantly signed up for sessions because he said his mother said it would help him. And that's the way he approached it. And he said, my mother is crazy, and I have a feeling you are too.
That's an awesome preface to this.
And we went through so many issues of his, dating back to like 4th grade issues. And he's given me permission to share this. And he said, all I can say is, I don't know how this blankety blank stuff works, but it works.
Wow. That's awesome. That is amazing. I really appreciate you sharing that. I highly encourage people to check out your TEDx and start looking into different resources. For those of you who did not go to the TEDx before this conversation, when you do go through it, you're going to see visually different pressure points that Dr. Katie is going through, that she's doing. Highly recommend people check that out. In addition, and I know that you have time restraints, so I want to be very respectful of your time. What other things would you recommend people look into? So they want to learn more. Do you have any references? Do you have anything that they could find more info? Maybe it's your website, maybe, connecting with you on LinkedIn. Where are some places of contact that people can reach out to you or other resources?
Sure. I have a YouTube channel. I have a Facebook, a LinkedIn, an Instagram, and Twitter, and all of them are my name, PhD. So they're all KATIE NALL PhD. I'm a bit of a wordsmith, Matt. So my website is my last name, Nall, NALL, followed by the word edge, EDGECO.com. It's knowledgecompany.com.
Perfect. Nice. Awesome. So what I'll do, I will have links in the show notes. It'll be under the TEDx link. People can just click, go to all of your information. Highly, highly recommend people check it out. I think there's a ton of value in what I just experienced. So I am also going to continue to look into this. So thank you so much for all of this insight. I have many different takeaways. I do want to focus on 3 of them, and then, we'll close this podcast out. The first one I really want people to recognize is we tell ourselves negative stories all the time, unfortunately. And these negative stories lead us to anxiety. That's the power. There's many powers of stories, but sometimes the stories we tell ourselves are some of the most powerful. So we get in these negative mind loops. When we get in those negative mind loops, based on what you said, we all go through stress. Unless someone is dead, they're going to go through stress. What do they do with that heavy stress? How do they relieve that stress? And you brought up a very interesting concept to me, which is the EFT, the different elements of tapping. you also took us through the importance as leaders to be willing and able to do things that look silly in the present moment to look genius in the future. And I really want people to grab a hold of that. Those are my 3 takeaways. I'm sure listeners will get many more from it. Again, highly recommend they go and check out your TEDx as well as the other different resources I will have in the show notes. And thank you so much for this conversation. I very much appreciate it.
Matt, you're amazing. And I appreciate all that you're doing for the entire world. I appreciate your podcast and all that you do. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. If you have a story that you would like to share, feel free to drop an email to matt@mattzaun.com with the subject line Stories with Traction. Also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, where I share tons of resources on how you can be a better storyteller. Remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.